What happens when the woman you threw away for a life of glamour turns out to be the gatekeeper to a world you can only dream of? Tonight, we delve into the story of Ethan Hayes, a man who thought he had it all. A trophy, girlfriend on his arm, and a ticket to the inner circle. He was attending the most exclusive party of the year, ready to toast to his new life and the plain, boring wife he'd left behind. But he was about to learn a brutal lesson. Sometimes the quietest people hold the loudest power. In a world of shimmering facades and calculated ambition, a ghost from his past was about to arrive, not in rags, but in riches he couldn't possibly comprehend. Stay tuned, because this is a story of karma consequence and a reveal so shocking it shattered one man's entire reality. The air in Ethan Hayes' penthouse apartment was thick with the scent of Chanel No. 5 and ambition. Tiffany Dubois, a woman whose beauty was as curated as her Instagram feed, adjusted the strap of her glittering Hervé Leger dress in the reflection of a floor-to-ceiling window overlooking Central Park. "Do you think this highlights my assets enough, babe?" she asked, striking a pose that was second nature to her. "Marcus Thorne will be there. I want his wife to feel insecure." Ethan smirked, straightening his Tom Ford tuxedo. At 34, he was the picture of Wall Street success: sharp suit, sharper haircut, and a Patek Philippe watch that cost more than his first car. "Everything about you makes other women feel insecure." "Tiff, that's why I'm with you." She preened at the compliment, the perfect validation for her existence. Tiffany was his upgrade, his real life. His previous life, the 6-year marriage to Amelia, felt like a black and white film he'd been forced to watch. Amelia. Just thinking her name brought a sigh of boredom. Plain Amy. That's what he'd called her in his head. She was comfortable, predictable. Her idea of a wild Friday night was finding a first edition copy of some obscure novel at a dusty bookstore, or tending to the small herb garden on their modest balcony. She wore sensible shoes, and her hair was almost always pulled back in a simple ponytail. She never understood his drive, his need to climb the social and corporate ladder at Blackwood Capital. "Why do you have to network so much?" Ethan, she'd asked him once, her brow furrowed with genuine confusion as he prepared for yet another mandatory client dinner. "Don't you ever just want to stay home and read with me?" The memory made him clench his jaw. He'd seen it as a lack of ambition, a ball and chain on his ankle. He wanted a partner who would shine beside him, a woman who would be an asset, not just a quiet presence in the background. Tiffany, with her 2 million followers and an encyclopedic knowledge of who was who in the New York elite, was that asset. The divorce had been surprisingly easy. Amelia hadn't fought him. There was no screaming, no throwing plates, just a quiet, heartbreaking sadness in her eyes that had made him feel a flicker of guilt before his ambition snuffed it out. She didn't ask for much, just her personal belongings and half the value of their apartment, which he'd gladly paid to be free of her. She'd packed her worn-out paperbacks, her gardening tools, and her collection of vintage maps into cardboard boxes and disappeared from his life. He'd heard through a mutual acquaintance that she'd moved somewhere on the West Coast, maybe Oregon, to find herself. He'd snorted at the cliché. "Ready to go?" Tiffany's voice pulled him from the past. "The Uber is downstairs. A black SUV, obviously." "Let's do it," Ethan said, his voice brimming with confidence. "Tonight's the night." Marcus Thorne is on the verge of a massive logistics deal for Thorne Industries. If I can get in his ear, convince him Blackwood Capital is the firm to handle the financing, it'll mean a partnership for me by Christmas. And a new Birkin for me. Tiffany cooed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "As many as you want," he promised, kissing her glossy lips. As they descended in the elevator, Ethan felt a surge of triumph. This was his world now. The galas, the private jets, the beautiful woman on his arm. He had shed his boring domestic skin and emerged as the man he was always meant to be. He had traded up in every conceivable way, leaving the quiet, unremarkable Amelia Vance in his rearview mirror. He hadn't just divorced her. He had erased her. He was sure he would never have to think about her again. The annual Thorn Foundation Gala was not merely a party, it was a coronation. Held at Marcus Thorne's palatial estate in Greenwich, Connecticut, it was where deals were born and social hierarchies were cemented. Helicopters deposited guests on one lawn, while a fleet of Rolls-Royces and Bentleys lined the cobblestone driveway. Every titan of industry, every political heavyweight, and every ounce of old money on the East Coast was present. For Ethan, walking through the grand entrance with Tiffany was like ascending Mount Olympus. The air hummed with power. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, casting a golden glow on the mingling crowds. A string quartet played Vivaldi in a corner, their music a genteel backdrop to the low murmur of billion-dollar conversations. Wow! Tiffany whispered, her eyes wide, immediately pulling out her phone to capture a discreet story for her followers. That's David Solomon from Goldman Sachs over there. And is that... Senator Kensington Ethan's chest swelled with pride. This is where we belong, Tiff. He navigated the room with practiced ease, a shark in a sea of bigger sharks. He exchanged pleasantries with a tech CEO. He knew from a previous deal, clapped a hedge fund manager on the back, and subtly ensured Tiffany was photographed, standing near the wife of a real estate mogul. Every move was calculated a step closer to his true target, Marcus Thorne. Thorne was a living legend, a self-made billionaire in his late 50s, with a formidable presence and eyes that seemed to see right through you. He was holding court near the massive marble fireplace, a circle of deferential listeners hanging on his every word. Getting a moment of his time tonight was Ethan's entire objective. "Okay, I'm going in," Ethan said to Tiffany, handing her a glass of champagne. "Mingle. Look stunning. You know the drill." "Don't worry," she purred. "I'll make sure everyone knows who I am." As Tiffany drifted off towards a group of socialites, Ethan took a deep breath and began to strategize his approach. He couldn't just walk up. That would be too aggressive. He needed an opening. He spotted Thorne's chief financial officer, a man he'd met briefly at a conference, and made a beeline for him. The conversation was stilted, full of the usual financial jargon, but it served its purpose. After a few minutes, the CFO gestured towards the main circle. "Marcus, you remember Ethan Hayes from Blackwood Capital, don't you, Marcus?" Thorne turned his piercing gaze on Ethan. For a moment, Ethan felt like a schoolboy presenting a book report. "Hayes. Right. You're handling the financing for the Prentice acquisition, aren't you?" "That's right, Mr. Thorne," Ethan said, his heart pounding. "This was it. It's going smoothly. But I was actually hoping to speak with you about your new logistics expansion. I have some innovative ideas about structuring the capital raise that could save you a significant percentage on interest." Thorne raised a skeptical eyebrow. He'd heard 1,000 pitches just like this one. "Is that so? My people are already in talks with the big players, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, and they're great." Ethan cut in trying to sound confident, not desperate. "But they're behemoths. Blackwood offers a more boutique, agile approach. We're hungry, Mr. Thorne. We'll work harder for you than anyone else." Thorne was about to respond when a sudden, powerful thrumming sound filled the air, drowning out the string quartet. The sound grew louder, a rhythmic whump, whump, whump that vibrated through the floorboards. Heads turned towards the sprawling back lawn, visible through a set of towering French doors. A helicopter, not the small news choppers one might see over the city, but a sleek black Sikorsky S-76. A machine favored by royalty and the ultra-wealthy was descending onto the private helipad. This was an arrival of a different magnitude. The gala's attendees, people accustomed to event displays of wealth, stopped their conversations and stared. This was not normal. Marcus Thorne himself looked intrigued, a flicker of surprise crossing his stoic face. "Well," now he murmured, his conversation with Ethan completely forgotten. "It seems our guest of honor has arrived." Ethan frowned. "Guest of honor, gobbled honor." He had studied the guest list. He knew every major player who was supposed to be here. Who could possibly command this kind of entrance, upstaging even the host himself? The helicopter's blades slowed and the door slid open. A figure was silhouetted against the internal lights. For a moment, they just stood there, letting the anticipation build. Then a woman stepped out. Even from a distance, across the lawn and through the glass, her presence was electric. She wore a gown of deep sapphire silk that seemed to drink the light cascading around her in elegant folds. Diamonds glittered at her throat, a necklace so brilliant it looked like a captured constellation. Her hair, which Ethan couldn't quite make out, was styled in a sophisticated updo that accentuated a long, graceful neck. She moved with a liquid confidence, an innate elegance that couldn't be bought or taught. It was the kind of poise that came from a lifetime of knowing your place in the world. A murmur swept through the room. "Who is that? I've never seen her before. Look at that necklace. That has to be Harry Winston." Tiffany had returned to Ethan's side, her jaw practically on the floor. "Oh my God, who is that? She looks like royalty." Ethan was just as captivated and slightly annoyed. This mysterious arrival had stolen his thunder, completely derailing his pitch to Thorn. As the woman drew closer, walking along the stone path towards the French doors, her features began to come into focus under the party lights. Ethan felt a strange, unsettling flicker of familiarity. There was something in the way she held her head, a certain curve of her cheek. But it was impossible. The woman approaching was a vision of power and glamour, a goddess descending from the heavens. Marcus Thorne broke away from the group and strode towards the entrance, a broad, genuine smile on his face, a smile Ethan had never seen him give anyone. He met the woman at the door, taking both of her hands in his. "You made it," Thorne's voice boomed, projecting into the now silent ballroom. "Everyone, may I have your attention?" The room fell completely quiet. Every eye was fixed on the entrance. Ethan stood on his tiptoes, craning his neck to get a better look. The woman was now fully illuminated by the chandeliers. Her face was heart-stoppingly beautiful, with high cheekbones, intelligent eyes, and a serene smile that held a hint of steel. Her dark chestnut hair was woven with subtle diamond pins, and as she turned her head slightly to survey the room, Ethan's world stopped turning. His blood ran cold. His champagne glass slipped from his numb fingers and shattered on the marble floor. It wasn't possible. It was a phantom, a trick of the light, a cruel joke played by his own mind. But it was no joke. The woman standing beside Marcus Thorne, the woman who had arrived in a private helicopter wearing millions of dollars in jewels, the woman who had captivated the most powerful people in the country with her mere presence, was Amelia. His plain, boring, sensible ex-wife, Amelia. Thorne's voice echoed in the cavernous silence. "I'd like you all to give a warm welcome to the woman who is not only my dear friend, but the brilliant strategic mind and vice chair of the board behind the largest logistics empire on the planet. Please welcome Amelia Vance of Vance Global Logistics." The name hung in the air, an explosion, followed by a deafening silence. Amelia Vance. Vance Global Logistics. Ethan felt the floor drop out from under him. It was as if he'd been plunged into ice water, the air sucked from his lungs. His mind struggled to connect the two realities. The Amelia he knew, the one who wore faded jeans, who found joy in the smell of old paper, who thought a luxury was buying organic vegetables, and this regal creature commanding the attention of the entire room. Vance, her maiden name. He'd barely given it a thought. It was just a name as plain and unremarkable as he'd thought she was. Now it echoed in his mind like a cannon blast. Vance Global Logistics, VGL. They weren't just a company, they were an institution. A private, family-owned behemoth that dominated global shipping supply chain management and advanced AI-driven logistics. They were the invisible backbone of modern commerce, with a valuation that was whispered about in the financial world, but never publicly confirmed, rumored to be in the hundreds of billions. They were notoriously private, run by the reclusive patriarch Sterling Vance. And Amelia, his Amelia, was his daughter, the heiress. A wave of nausea washed over him. The memories flooded back now, tainted with a horrifying new context. Her simple life wasn't a choice born of a lack of imagination. It was an escape. Her love for vintage maps wasn't just a quirky hobby. It was a connection to her family's global empire. Her quiet, unassuming nature wasn't a weakness. It was a disguise. He remembered an argument they'd had a year before the divorce. He'd been furious about losing a promotion. "You just don't get it, Amy," he'd yelled. "You don't know what it's like to have to fight for every scrap to build something from nothing. You're content in your little bubble." He could see her face now, the profound sadness in her eyes. "You're right, Ethan," she had whispered. "I don't." He had mistaken her sadness for pity. It was guilt. "Ethan, Ethan." "What's wrong?" Tiffany's voice was a sharp, annoying buzz in his ear. "You look like you've seen a ghost. Do you know her?" He couldn't speak. He could only stare as Amelia. "No." Miss Vance laughed at something. Marcus Thorne said, her voice a low, confident melody that was utterly foreign to him. The woman he had criticized for being too shy to speak up at dinner parties was now effortlessly charming one of the most powerful men in the world. The dowdy ponytail was gone, replaced by an intricate chignon that revealed the elegant column of her neck. The sensible sweaters were replaced by a custom-made Jason Wu gown. The only thing that remained the same were her eyes, but now instead of quiet contemplation, they held a sharp, assessing intelligence. A cool, unshakable power. The crowd, recovering from its initial shock, began to buzz. Phones were being held up, no longer discreetly. The whispers were a rising tide. "Sterling Vance's daughter. I thought she was a recluse. I heard she was living off the grid, completely renounced the family. My God, VGL is the silent partner in Thorne's new Asian expansion. This is the deal maker." The last comment hit Ethan like a physical blow. The logistics deal, the deal he was trying to finance. Thorne wasn't just in talks with VGL, they were the entire game, and Amelia was the face of it. His meticulously constructed world, his entire sense of self-worth built on his ascent, shattered into a million pieces. He hadn't been climbing a ladder. He'd been a jester obliviously performing in the courtyard of a castle, completely unaware that his quiet wife owned the entire kingdom. He hadn't discarded a pebble. He had thrown away the Hope Diamond. Tiffany, sensing a seismic shift in the social landscape, was piecing it together. Her eyes darted from Amelia's radiant figure to Ethan's ashen face. "Ethan, how do you know her?" she demanded, her voice losing its breathy affectation and gaining a hard, suspicious edge. Before he could answer, Amelia's gaze swept across the room. It was a deliberate, methodical scan, the look of a general surveying a battlefield. For a fleeting moment, her eyes met Ethan's. There was no shock in her expression, no anger, no surprise, just a flicker of something cold and distant, a brief, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, like one might give a piece of furniture they once owned. And then she looked right through him, her attention moving on as if he were nothing more than a part of the wallpaper. That single dismissive glance was more devastating than any screaming match or tearful confrontation could ever have been. It told him everything he needed to know. She knew he was here. She had known all along. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a reckoning. The atmosphere in the room had changed irrevocably. Amelia Vance was no longer just a beautiful guest. She was the new center of gravity. A gravitational pull of power and wealth emanated from her, and every person in the room was a satellite being drawn into her orbit. The circle around Marcus Thorne reformed, but now Amelia was its sun. Seas, who had barely given Ethan the time of day, were now jockeying for position, trying to catch her eye, hoping for a sliver of her attention. Ethan stood frozen, a ghost, at the feast. People who had been greeting him warmly just minutes before now seemed to look past him, their gazes fixed on the new powerhouse. He had become invisible. Tiffany finally snapped. "Ethan Hayes, you tell me right now how you know the heiress to Vance Global." Her voice was a low, furious hiss. Her perfectly manicured nails were digging into his arm. She's my ex-wife." He mumbled the words, tasting like ash in his mouth. Tiffany's face went through a rapid series of emotions: confusion, disbelief, dawning horror, and finally, pure, unadulterated rage. Her eyes, wide and incredulous, flickered back to Amelia, who was now engaged in an animated conversation with Senator Kensington. Her plain Amy. "Your boring little librarian ex-wife from Oregon is Amelia Vance." The name dripped with venomous awe. "The woman you told me had zero ambition and was probably living in a yurt somewhere I didn't know." Ethan pleaded, his voice hollow. "She never said a word. She called herself Amelia Vance, but I never made the connection. Who would she? She drove a 10-year-old Subaru. She bought her clothes at the Gap." "Oh, you idiot!" Tiffany snarled, yanking her arm away as if he were contaminated. "You absolute clueless fool. You were married to a billionaire heiress and you didn't know. You divorced her for me." The implication was clear. In her transactional world, he had just made the worst trade in history. He had traded a winning lottery ticket for a bag of magic beans. Desperate to do something, anything, Ethan started to move toward Amelia's circle. He didn't know what he would say. Apologize. Demand an explanation. He just needed to close the impossible distance that had opened up between them. He took 2 steps forward before a tall, impeccably dressed man with an earpiece subtly shifted his position, blocking his path. The man's suit was tailored to perfection, but it couldn't hide the solid build of a professional bodyguard. "Excuse me, sir," the man said, his voice polite but unyielding. "Miss Vance is in a private conversation." Ethan looked from the bodyguard to Amelia. She hadn't even glanced in their direction, but the message was clear. She had a wall around her, and he was firmly on the outside. He stumbled back, retreating to the edge of the room near a service corridor. Tiffany followed him, her face a mask of cold fury. "This is a disaster. My followers are already texting me. People are looking at me. They're laughing at me. The woman who stole a man from a billionaire. I look like a joke. Tiff, please," he begged. "We can fix this." "Fix this?" How she scoffed. "You're a mid-level banker whose entire claim to fame was dating me. She is the key to the biggest deal on Wall Street this year. You're not even in the same stratosphere. You're not even in the same galaxy." From across the room, Ethan watched Amelia. She was a different person, or rather the person she had always been, but had kept hidden from him. He saw it now in the small things, the way she gestured with her hands when making a point. He'd always found it slightly distracting, but here in this context, it was commanding. The way her brow would furrow slightly. When she was listening intently, he had thought it was a sign of confusion, but now he saw it was deep, analytical concentration. She had played a role for 6 years. She had built a fortress of normalcy around herself, and he had been the unwitting guard at the gate, too stupid to ever peek inside. The question that screamed in his mind was why? Why would she hide everything? Why would she subject herself to a normal, middle-class life with him? The answer when it came was even more damning. She had done it to see if someone could love her. Just her. Amelia, the woman who loved rainy days and the smell of soil. Not Amelia Vance, the heiress. He had been given the ultimate test, and he had failed in the most spectacular way imaginable. Suddenly, the crowd around Amelia parted slightly. She said a few parting words to the senator, and then began to walk, not towards him, but towards the grand terrace overlooking the gardens. Her path would take her directly past where he and Tiffany were standing. His heart hammered against his ribs. This was his chance. He had to say something. As she approached her security detail, the same man who had blocked him fell into step a few paces behind her. She moved with an unhurried grace, her silk gown whispering against the marble floor. She was just feet away. Amy Ethan choked out the name, sounding foreign and foolish on his lips. Amelia stopped. She turned her head slowly, her expression unreadable. For the first time that night, she looked directly at him. Her eyes, those same eyes that had once looked at him with such adoration, were now as cold and clear as ice. It's Mercy Vance, actually, she said, her voice calm and level. Yet it cut him to the bone. She glanced dismissively at Tiffany, a flicker of something that might have been pity, and then her gaze returned to Ethan. You're a long way from home, Ethan. I hope you're enjoying the party. Then, without another word, she turned and continued toward the terrace, leaving him standing in her wake, utterly and completely destroyed. The brief, chilling exchange left Ethan reeling. It wasn't just a dismissal, it was a demonstration of power. She had reduced their entire 6-year history to a polite, meaningless pleasantry one might offer a stranger. He was no longer a person to her. He was an anecdote, a footnote in a chapter of her life she had decisively closed. Tiffany let out a bitter, humorless laugh. Miss Vance, oh, that is perfect. She didn't even raise her voice. She just erased you with a sentence. She looked at Ethan with utter contempt. I need a drink, a real one. She turned and stalked towards the bar, leaving him alone with the shrapnel of his ruined ambitions. Ethan's mind, trained to analyze markets and find patterns, was now racing, trying to process the new data. This couldn't be a simple coincidence. Her timing was too perfect. Her presence at this specific gala, tied to the very deal he was banking his career on, felt like a meticulously planned strategic move. The Amelia he thought he knew might have been quiet, but she was also brilliant. She had a master's degree in economics from Stanford, which he'd dismissed as a quaint academic pursuit. How had he been so blind? He needed to understand the scope of the damage. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling slightly, and began a frantic search. Amelia Vance, Vance, Global Logistics, Sterling Vance, daughter. The search results were sparse, a testament to the family's obsession with privacy. But there were whispers on obscure financial blogs and society pages from years ago. Mentions of a brilliant daughter who had eschewed the family business to live a normal life. An article from Forbes speculated that Sterling Vance's mysterious heir apparent was being groomed behind the scenes, a secret weapon being held in reserve. Then he found it. A small press release from 6 months ago, buried on the VGL corporate website. It announced the appointment of Amelia Vance to the board of directors and her promotion to vice chair of strategic expansion. The date was 3 weeks after their divorce was finalized. The timeline clicked into place with sickening clarity. Her finding herself in Oregon hadn't been a retreat. It had been a staging ground. The moment she was legally and logistically free of him, she had stepped back into her world, not hesitantly, but with purpose. She hadn't just been waiting, she had been planning. He looked back across the room and saw Marcus Thorne joining Amelia on the terrace. They were leaning against the balustrade, looking out over the manicured gardens, deep in conversation. Thorne was listening intently, nodding, his entire demeanor one of respect and collaboration. He wasn't talking to the daughter of a powerful man. He was talking to a peer. A horrifying thought began to crystallize in Ethan's mind. What if this wasn't just about personal revenge? What if it was business? He thought back to his pitch to Thorne. He'd been so proud of the innovative financing structure he'd developed for Blackwood Capital. It involved a series of bridge loans funneled through smaller, more agile subsidiary lenders to secure the initial capital for Thorne's expansion before the major bond offering. It was complex, aggressive, and hinged on the cooperation of several smaller entities. With a growing sense of dread, he started cross-referencing the subsidiary lenders in his proposal with known VGL, shell corporations, and investment arms. He had to dig deep into financial databases he had access to through his work phone, his fingers flying across the screen. And then he saw it. The linchpin of his entire plan, a mid-sized private equity firm called North Star Holdings. which had given him a preliminary letter of intent, was a wholly owned subsidiary of Vance Global Logistics. He felt the blood drain from his face. He had, in his ignorance, built his entire career-making proposal on a foundation that Amelia owned. She would have seen it. Her legal and financial teams would have vetted every aspect of the Thorn expansion, including all potential financing offers. She would have seen his name, Ethan Hayes, Blackwood Capital, and the entire, desperate architecture of his ambition laid bare. She hadn't just shown up tonight to humiliate him socially. She was here to destroy him professionally. He imagined the scene in the VGL boardroom. His proposal arrives. An analyst points it out. Sssss. Vance, this offer from Blackwood Capital. The lead banker is an Ethan Hayes. Is that? And he could picture her cool, calm expression. Yes, I know him. Let his proposal proceed. I want to see how far he gets. She had given him the rope. She had watched him fashion it into a noose, drape it over a branch, and slip it around his own neck. Her appearance tonight wasn't the beginning of his downfall. It was the finale. She was here to watch him kick. The scale of her intellect, her patience, her ruthlessness was terrifying. He hadn't just underestimated her. He had failed to even comprehend her. He had been playing checkers while she was playing multi-dimensional chess, and he had been a pawn in her game from the very beginning. He looked over at the terrace again. Amelia gestured towards the sky, and Thorn laughed a deep, hearty sound. They weren't just closing a deal. They were celebrating a victory. Her victory. He finally understood. He hadn't broken her heart. He had insulted her intelligence. And for a woman like Amelia Vance, that was a far more grievous offense, one that required not just retribution, but annihilation. Armed with the devastating knowledge of his own engineered demise, Ethan felt a desperate primal need for confrontation. He couldn't let it end like this, with a cold glance and a silent corporate execution. He needed to hear it from her. He needed her to look him in the eye and acknowledge what she had done. He watched the terrace, waiting. After several more minutes, Marcus Thorn clasped Amelia's hand, gave a respectful nod, and headed back into the party, his face glowing with the satisfaction of a secured deal. For a moment, Amelia remained alone, her back to the ballroom, as she gazed into the night. This was his only chance. Ignoring the warning glance from her security guard, who was standing discreetly near the doors, Ethan pushed his way onto the terrace. The cool night air was a shock after the stuffy ballroom. "Amy," he said, his voice raw. She didn't turn around immediately. She took a slow, deliberate sip from her glass of water. "I believe we've already established the correct form of address, Ethan." Why, he demanded, his voice cracking. 6 years? Was it all a lie? A game? Were you just studying a lesser species in its natural habitat? At this, she finally turned to face him. The moonlight caught the diamonds at her throat, scattering cold fire. Her expression was not angry, but weary, as if she were dealing with a tiresome child. "I was not a lie," she said, her voice quiet, but carrying an immense weight. "I was the most honest version of myself I could possibly be. I stripped away the money, the name, the power, everything that people see before they see me. I wanted to know if that person, the one who loves books and quiet nights and can't cook to save her life, was enough for someone. I wanted to be loved for something I was not, something I had." Her gaze hardened. "I gave you the truest part of myself, and you told me in 1,000 different ways that she was not enough. She was too plain, too boring, not ambitious enough. You didn't just leave me, Ethan. You rejected the very core of who I am." The truth of her words was a physical blow. I didn't know," he stammered. It was the weakest defense, and he knew it. "No, you didn't," she agreed, a flicker of genuine sadness in her eyes. "But it shouldn't have mattered. The person I was with, you was a good person, a loyal partner, a loving wife. But you weren't looking for a partner. You were looking for an accessory. Something shiny to wear on your arm to impress people like Marcus Thorn." She gestured back at the party. You wanted the prize without understanding what the prize actually was. His desperation turned to anger, a last-ditch defense of his shattered ego. So this is what revenge. You show up here flaunting all this to ruin me. North Star Holdings. That was you, wasn't it? You let my deal go forward, just so you could kill it yourself. Amelia gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of her head. You give yourself too much credit. My world does not revolve around you, Ethan. The Thorn Industries partnership has been in the works for over a year. Your little financing pitch was a minor, almost comical footnote. When your proposal crossed my desk, I had a choice. I could have had my team kill it quietly, professionally, but I decided to let it stand. Why, he whispered. Because I wanted you to be here tonight, she said, her voice dropping to an icy whisper. I wanted you to get your foot in the door of this world you worship. I wanted you to feel the thrill of thinking you were about to make it. I wanted you to be standing right here at the peak of your deluded ambition, when you finally learned that the entire mountain you were trying to climb was owned by the woman you threw away because she wasn't good enough for you. She took a step closer, and for the first time he saw not just power, but a deep, abiding pain that she had expertly concealed. This isn't revenge, Ethan. This is a consequence. It's a lesson. Some things, loyalty, love, integrity, they don't have a price tag. And when you trade them away for something you think is more valuable, you end up with nothing. From the doorway of the terrace, a figure emerged. It was Tiffany, her face streaked with tears of rage, her perfect makeup ruined. Are you finished? She spat at Ethan. She ignored Amelia completely, as if acknowledging her would be to concede utter defeat. I'm leaving. I have a car coming. Don't call me. Don't text me. My social media manager will be blocking you on all platforms within the hour. We are done. She looked at him one last time, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and disgust. You were married to her and you let her go. You are the biggest fool I have ever met. Tiffany turned on her heel and disappeared back into the party, a tornado of fury and shame. Ethan stood there, stripped of everything. His career was over. The woman he'd left his wife for had abandoned him. He was a laughingstock in the only world he had ever valued. Amelia watched him, her face a mask of stoicism. The personal part of their interaction was over. This was now just business. For what it's worth, she said, her voice devoid of all emotion, Blackwood Capital will receive a formal notice tomorrow morning that their proposal is no longer under consideration. I'd advise you to have your resignation letter ready. Her security guard, Julian Croft, reappeared at her side, holding a light wrap for her shoulders. Ms. Vance, the car is ready whenever you are. Thank you, Julian, she said, turning her back on Ethan for the final time. I'm ready now. He watched her walk away, her posture perfect, her steps unwavering. She didn't look back. She was walking back to her life, a life of unimaginable power and influence, leaving him alone in the darkness on a billionaire's terrace, a relic of a past she had finally and completely shed. The gala for Ethan did not end. It merely mutated into a new form of torture. He was trapped in a soundproof box of his own, making, forced to watch a world that no longer included him. The vibrant symphony of power and influence he had so desperately wanted to join now played a funeral dirge for his life. Laughter from across the room felt like a personal accusation. The clinking of champagne glasses sounded like nails being hammered into his coffin. He saw his boss, Mr. Albright, senior partner at Blackwood Capital, speaking with a rival from JP Morgan. Albright glanced in his direction, a look of such profound disappointment and fury on his face that Ethan felt a physical chill. The message was clear. Don't you dare come near me. He was a contamination, a walking reputational hazard. People didn't just avoid him, they angled their bodies away as he passed, creating a visible void around him. He retreated to a dark corner, nursing a glass of club soda, the burning in his stomach too intense for alcohol. He watched as the party began to wind down, as the titans of industry departed in their helicopters and town cars their goodbyes to Marcus Thorne, echoing with the promise of future deals he would now only read about. The wait for the valet to retrieve his car was an eternity. He saw drivers for minor executives being waved through, while he was repeatedly told his car was on its way. It was the final petty humiliation in an evening of grand-scale obliteration. When his Audi finally pulled up, the young valet refused to make eye contact, a clear sign that the story had already trickled down to the staff. The drive back to Manhattan was a journey through a ghost town of his own hopes. The glittering skyline, once a symbol of his ascent, now looked like a jagged mocking grin. Each lit window in every skyscraper was a life, a career, a world he was now locked out of. He had flown too close to the sun, and the sun, it turned out, had been his wife. He walked into the penthouse he shared with Tiffany, and the silence was absolute. It wasn't empty, it was cleansed. The air no longer held her expensive perfume. The countertop was cleared of her dozen skincare products. He walked into the massive closet and saw the gaping holes where her collection of designer bags and shoes had been. She had been ruthlessly efficient. On the cold marble island in the kitchen sat a single object, the platinum keycard to the building, and a hastily scribbled note on a piece of Tiffany's personalized stationery. "Don't make this messy. My lawyer will be in touch about the rest of my things." There was no anger in the handwriting, just the cold, crisp finality of a business transaction. He wandered into the bedroom. There, lying in the center of the perfectly made king-size bed, was the Hervé dress she had worn that night. It was a final, theatrical gesture of contempt, a relic of the life he had chosen and lost. He sank onto the edge of the bed, the expensive fabric cool beneath his hand. His mind, unbidden, flashed back to a different home. The small two-bedroom apartment he and Amelia had shared in Queens. It was always filled with the scent of old books and whatever she was growing in her window box, basil mostly. He remembered a Saturday afternoon rain lashing against the windows. He was stressed about work, pacing the living room. Amelia had quietly gotten up, put on a kettle for tea, and returned with 2 steaming mugs and a worn-out blanket. She didn't offer solutions or platitudes. She just sat with him, her presence a warm, calming anchor in his self-made storm. He had brushed off her quiet affection as insufficient a passive response to his dynamic ambition. He saw it now for what it was unwavering support, a deep and unconditional love he had been too blind and too arrogant to value. He had traded that profound sense of peace for the brittle, high-pitched thrill of Tiffany's world, and the silence in this penthouse was his reward. He finally broke his body, racked with dry, silent sobs of a man who has realized he is the sole architect of his own ruin. Miles away, the journey back from the gala was the antithesis of Ethan's. Amelia sat in the plush leather interior of her custom Maybach as it glided silently through the Connecticut countryside towards a private airfield. Julian Croft sat opposite her, reviewing messages on a secure tablet. "The board has been alerted to the successful finalization of the Thorne partnership," he said, his voice a calm baritone. "Your father sends his congratulations." He said, and I quote, "It's about time someone put Thorne in his place." Amelia allowed a small, tired smile. Father enjoys the sport of it all. She looked out the window, the passing headlights illuminating her thoughtful expression. She wasn't euphoric. There was no giddy sense of victory. Instead, she felt a profound sense of closure, like the final satisfying click of a lock on a door she never intended to open again. "Was it difficult?" Julian asked, his tone shifting from professional to personal. He had known her since she was a girl, had been the one to help her orchestrate her escape into a normal life years ago. He was more than security. He was her confidant. Seeing him, she mused. No. Seeing what he had become, what he always was underneath. That was difficult. It confirmed the choice I made in leaving was the right one. The only one. She paused, her gaze distant. The woman he was married to, the plain Amy he despised, she died a little every time he chose ambition over her. Last night wasn't about killing his career, it was about attending its funeral. It was necessary to ensure that part of my past was well and truly buried. Her residence wasn't a sterile glass penthouse, but the top two floors of a historic brownstone in Brooklyn Heights, meticulously restored. The space was a reflection of her true self walls, lined with books from floor to ceiling, comfortable, elegant furniture, and pieces of art that she had collected for their beauty, not their brand name. It was a home, not a showroom. She changed out of her gown and into a simple cashmere robe, her movements fluid and unhurried. She walked over to a bookshelf and pulled out a small, leather-bound photo album. She flipped through a few pages past photos of her travels and family until she found the one she was looking for. It was of her and Ethan, taken about a year into their marriage. They were hiking somewhere upstate. She was laughing her hair a mess, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. He was looking at her, a genuine smile on his face, a smile from before the corrosive need for more had completely consumed him. She looked at the photo for a long moment, a silent eulogy for the man he might have been, for the simple happiness she had genuinely hoped they could build together. Then with a quiet sigh, she closed the album and slid it back into its place on the shelf. She would not forget that part of her life, but it would no longer define her. It was history, and she was an architect of the future. The next morning, as Ethan was receiving the phone call that formally ended his career, Amelia was standing before the VGL Board of Directors. The room was a testament to understated power, its single window, a vast panoramic view of the global shipping lanes her family commanded. The men and women at the table were the old guard, brilliant but cautious. The integration with Thorn Industries represents a significant capital outlay, said one older board member, a longtime friend of her father's. Your projected efficiency gains are aggressive, Amelia. Amelia didn't flinch. She gestured to the smart screen behind her, which lit up with complex data streams and logistical models. They're not aggressive, Robert. They're necessary, she stated, her voice resonating with calm authority. By leveraging our proprietary AI, Odyssey, to reroute Thorn's supply chain through our automated ports in Singapore and Rotterdam, we will cut their distribution costs by 19% in the first year alone. That's not a projection. It's a guarantee based on the beta modeling we've been running for 6 months. She fielded their questions with a precision and depth of knowledge that left no room for doubt. She spoke their language of risk mitigation, capital allocation, and market dominance, but with a visionary fluency that was entirely her own. She was not her father's daughter playing a role. She was the future of the company, and everyone in the room knew it. As the meeting concluded, with a unanimous vote of approval, she stood before the great window, looking out, not at the ships, but at the horizon. Her work tonight and this morning hadn't been about Ethan. He was merely the last piece of debris she needed to clear away before starting her real work. Her grand experiment had taught her a valuable lesson. Hiding from her power was a betrayal of her own potential. Now she was ready to wield it, not for revenge, not for status, but to build something lasting, to create a legacy that was not just inherited, but earned. The quiet life was over. The real work had just begun. And that's the incredible story of how one man's shallow ambition led to his ultimate downfall, and how the woman he cast aside stepped into the power she had been hiding all along. It's a powerful reminder that true worth isn't about flashy appearances or social status. It's about integrity, character, and the quiet strength that lies within. What did you think of Amelia's masterfully planned revelation? Was it cold-hearted revenge or justified karma? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were moved by this story of consequence and empowerment, please show your support by smashing that like button and sharing this video with someone who needs to hear it. And for more gripping stories that dive deep into the complexities of human nature, Make sure you hit subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story. What happens when the man who left you for a better life comes back just to rub it in your face? For Esther Vincent, the sting of betrayal was still fresh when her ex-husband Miles cornered her at her dead-end job. He wasn't there to apologize. He was there to show off his new fiancée and her blindingly expensive diamond ring, a symbol of everything he thought Esther wasn't. But he made one critical mistake. He underestimated her. He thought he had won the game of life, but he had no idea that while he was busy showing off a diamond, Esther was about to inherit the entire mine. This is the story of how a calculated act of cruelty backfired in the most spectacular way imaginable, leading one woman from a humble coffee shop to the helm of a $3 billion fortune. The bell above the door of the Daily Grind chimed a sound Esther Vincent had come to associate with the Sisyphean rhythm of her new life. Another customer, another forced smile, another latte that cost more than she made in an hour. It was a dreary Tuesday in November, the sky the color of dishwater, and the cafe was mostly empty. She was wiping down the sticky counter, the scent of stale coffee and disinfectant clinging to her cheap apron, when the bell chimed again. This time, however, it felt different. A cold draft snaked its way up her spine. She looked up and her heart plummeted into the worn-out soles of her sneakers. It was Miles Porter, her ex-husband, and he wasn't alone. Clinging to his arm was a woman who looked like she'd been assembled by an Instagram filter. Impossibly white teeth, a cascade of blonde extensions, and a tight pink dress that screamed new money. This was Tiffany Miller, the woman Miles had left her for. The woman he'd been seeing for 6 months behind her back before their decade-long marriage crumbled into dust and legal fees. Esther's training kicked in. She plastered on her customer service smile, a fragile mask that she hoped concealed the tremor in her hands. "Welcome to the Daily Grind. What can I get for you?" Miles's smirk was slow, deliberate, and utterly cruel. It was the same smirk he'd worn when he told her she'd let herself go. The same one he'd had when he packed his bags, telling her he needed a partner who was his equal, not an anchor. Well, Esther. "Fancy seeing you here," he said, his eyes sweeping over her uniform with theatrical disdain. "Still making coffee, huh? Good for you. It's important to have a hobby." Tiffany giggled, a high-pitched, tinkling sound that grated on Esther's nerves. "Oh, Miles, be nice," she cooed, though her eyes were anything but. They were scanning Esther from head to toe, a silent, brutal judgment. "We'll have 2 skinny vanilla lattes," Miles announced, then leaned in conspiratorially, his voice dropping but loud enough for the one other customer in the shop to hear. "Make them extra hot. Tiffany gets cold so easily. Don't you, babe?" He squeezed the woman's arm, and as if on cue, Tiffany sighed dramatically and extended her left hand to rest it on the counter, directly in Esther's line of sight. And there it was, the ring. It wasn't just a ring, it was a supernova, a cushion-cut diamond that had to be at least 5 carats, flanked by smaller diamonds, sitting atop a platinum band. It was ostentatious, blinding, and so grotesquely large it looked like a prop. It was a weapon, and it was aimed directly at Esther's heart. "Oh my." Esther said, her voice a reedy whisper. She forced herself to meet Tiffany's gaze. "Miles picked it out himself," Tiffany said, wiggling her fingers so the facets caught the dim cafe light and threw tiny, spiteful rainbows across the counter. "He has the most impeccable taste. It's from Cartier." Of course it was. Miles had always been obsessed with brands with the appearance of success. During their marriage, he'd insisted on a leased BMW they couldn't afford, and designer watches bought on credit. He'd criticized her for preferring classic films over blockbuster hits, for loving dusty old art history books more than glossy magazines. She was, in his words, unambitious and provincial. "It's lovely." Esther managed to choke out her fingers, tightening on the damp rag in her hand. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, creeping flush that spread from her chest to her cheeks. They hadn't come for coffee. They had come for this, to perform this little scene to ensure she understood her place in the New World Order. She was the discarded, dowdy wife, working a minimum wage job. They were the glittering, successful couple on their way to a life she could only dream of. Just lovely, Miles chuckled, a low, rumbling sound of pure condescension. Come on, Elle, you can do better than that. It's a VVS1D color. Cost more than my first condo. But nothing's too good for my Tiff. He leaned over and kissed Tiffany's temple, a gesture of ownership. Every second felt like an eternity. Esther's mind raced, replaying the 1,000 sacrifices she had made for him. She'd put her own PhD in art history on indefinite hold to support his budding career in real estate. She'd edited his business proposals, coached him for presentations, and celebrated his every minor victory as if it were her own. She'd believed in him, in them, and this was her reward. She took a deep breath, forcing the air into her tight lungs. She would not cry, not in front of them. She punched their order into the register, her movements stiff and robotic. That'll be 12,050s. Miles pulled out a crisp $100 bill from a thick money clip. He'd never used a money clip when they were married. Keep the change, he said with a magnanimous wave of his hand. Looks like you could use it. The barb landed exactly as intended. It was a direct reference to the bitter divorce settlement where his lawyer had painted her as a freeloader, conveniently forgetting the inheritance she'd used to pay the down payment on their first home, the home he now shared with Tiffany. As Esther turned to the espresso machine, her back to them, she allowed a single hot tear to escape and trace a path down her cheek. The hiss of the steam wand was a welcome noise, drowning out the sound of their smug whispers. She worked on autopilot, her hands expertly tamping the espresso grounds and frothing the milk, a muscle memory from a life she never imagined for herself. She placed the 2 cups on the counter, careful not to look at the ring again. Here you are, she said, her voice flat, devoid of all emotion. Tiffany picked up her cup, her bejeweled hand looking absurdly out of place. Thanks, she chirped, then looked at Miles. Ready to go, honey? We have our tasting at Percy at 1. Percy, the 3 Michelin star restaurant they had once dreamed of going to for their 15th anniversary. An anniversary they never reached. Absolutely, Miles said, taking Esther in one last time. His expression was one of finality, of a chapter firmly and satisfyingly closed. Good seeing you, Esther. Take care of yourself. It wasn't a wish. It was a dismissal. They turned and walked out, the bell chiming their departure. The cafe was silent again, save for the hum of the refrigerator. Esther stood frozen, staring at the door, the ghost of that diamond seared onto her retinas. The $100 bill lay on the counter like a final insult. She didn't pick it up. Instead, she slowly unwound the fingers of her right hand from the rag she was clutching. Her knuckles were white. She looked down at her own hand. It was bare, save for a faint indentation on her ring finger where her simple, modest wedding band used to be. The humiliation burned, but underneath it, something else was beginning to stir. A tiny, cold ember of rage. Miles thought he had delivered the final blow. He thought he had won. In his small, superficial world of brand names and carrot sizes, he probably had. But as Esther finally reached for the $100 bill, a different thought took root in her mind. A quote from one of her beloved art history books about the nature of masterpieces. True value isn't always what glitters the most. Sometimes it's hidden in plain sight, waiting for the right eye to appreciate it. She crumpled the bill in her fist. He hadn't broken her. He had just set her free. And she was done with the daily grind. She was done being the victim in his story. It was time to start writing her own. The week after the ambush at the coffee shop was a blur of righteous fury and paralyzing self-doubt. Esther quit her job the very next day. She walked in, handed her apron to her surprised manager, and walked out without a word, leaving Miles's $100 tip in the jar. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt monumental. It was also terrifying. Her savings were meager, a dwindling cushion that wouldn't last more than a few months in her small, overpriced apartment. For days, she drifted. She updated her resume, scrolling through job sites for administrative assistant or receptionist positions, anything that felt safe and paid the bills. But her heart wasn't in it. Every job description felt like another cage, another life of quiet desperation. The encounter with Miles and Tiffany had been a brutal wake-up call. It wasn't just about the money or the ring. It was about the life she had abandoned, the person she had forgotten she was. One afternoon, desperate for a change of scenery that didn't cost anything, she found herself walking towards the Met. It had been years since she'd last visited, a lifetime ago, when she was a bright-eyed doctoral candidate, her head filled with theories on brushstrokes and provenance. Back then, these halls were her sanctuary, her future. The moment she stepped inside the great hall, the familiar, hushed grandeur washed over her. The scent of aged marble and floor polish, the distant echo of footsteps. It felt like coming home. She bypassed the blockbuster exhibits, the crowds jostling for selfies with Monet's water lilies, and headed for the quiet, less trafficked European painting galleries. She wandered, letting the art speak to her. She saw old friends in the Rembrandts, their faces etched with a profound humanity that made her own troubles feel both smaller and more universal. She stood for a long time before a turbulent Turner seascape, feeling a kinship with the storm-tossed ship. Eventually, she found her way to a smaller, quieter room dedicated to the Dutch Golden Age. And there it was, her favorite painting in the entire museum, one that rarely drew a large crowd, Johannes Vermeer's study of a young woman. It wasn't as famous as Girl with a Pearl Earring, but to Esther it was more intimate, more mysterious. The subject's face, turned towards the viewer, held an expression of soft, melancholic introspection. The play of light on her satin yellow wrap was nothing short of miraculous. Esther sank onto the polished wooden bench opposite the painting, letting out a sigh she didn't realize she'd been holding. She wasn't just looking at the painting, she was communing with it. She noticed details she hadn't seen in years. The subtle way Vermeer used a green earth underpainting to give the flesh tones their pearlescent luminosity, the tiny precise daubs of lead tin yellow that created the illusion of shimmering fabric. "It's the light, isn't it?" The voice was deep calm and came from her right. Esther started pulled from her reverie. An older gentleman had taken a seat at the other end of the bench, his gaze also fixed on the Vermeer. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit that spoke of quiet generational wealth, not the flashy labels Miles favored. His silver hair was neatly combed, and his face was lined with the kind of wrinkles that came from thought and experience, not just age. He didn't just paint light. Esther replied, her voice soft, almost speaking to herself. He painted the air it moved through. He made it tangible. The man turned his head slightly, and his eyes, a startlingly clear blue, met hers. They held a spark of intelligent curiosity. That's a beautiful way to put it. Most people just say they like the colors. A small smile touched Esther's lips. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of her old self. Most people don't spend enough time looking. They see, but they don't observe. Vermeer, he forces you to observe. Look at her pearl earring. It's just 2 strokes of paint, a bright highlight and a soft, reflected light off her collar. There's no hook, no setting, but our mind fills in the gaps. It's genius. The man listened intently, a slight smile playing on his lips. You're not just a casual admirer, are you? Esther felt a blush rise to her cheeks, but this time it wasn't from humiliation. It was the flush of being seen. She said the past tense, hanging in the air. I studied art history. I was working on my PhD, focusing on provenance and attribution in 17th century Dutch art. Was he prompted, gently? The story was a familiar bitter pill. Life happened, she said, offering a vague, sanitized version. I got married. My husband's career took precedence. It was a choice I made. A choice she was now paying for, she left unsaid. The man simply nodded, his expression unreadable, but not unkind. He turned back to the painting. Provenance is a fascinating field. A painting's journey can be as compelling as the image itself. This one, he gestured to the Vermeer, had a rather interesting path. Owned by a bakers' guild in Delft, disappeared during the Napoleonic Wars, resurfaced in a dusty Belgian estate in the 1880s. Each owner, each hiding place adds a layer to its story. Esther was stunned. This was not common knowledge found on the museum placard. This was deep academic detail. How did you know that? He finally turned to face her, fully extending a hand. Julian Devereux. And to answer your question, I know because my great-grandfather was the one who bought it from that Belgian estate. Esther's jaw nearly dropped. She shook his hand, his grip firm and warm. Devereux. The name was familiar. Devereux Holdings, a massive privately owned conglomerate with interests in technology, renewable energy, and she now recalled from a long-forgotten article one of the most significant private art collections in the world. This wasn't just a wealthy man. This was a titan. By some estimates, his family's fortune was north of 3 bars. Esther Vincent, she said, her voice barely a whisper. She felt suddenly underdressed, out of her depth. A pleasure, Esther Vincent. Julian said, his smile genuine. You have a remarkable eye. It's rare to find someone who speaks the language of art so fluently. Tell me, what do you think of the attribution of the concerts, he asked, referencing the Vermeer stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum. And just like that, they were off. For the next hour, they sat on that bench and talked. They debated the possible hands in Rembrandt's workshop, the influence of Caravaggio on the Utrecht school, and the modern techniques used to uncover forgeries. Esther felt alive. The dusty corners of her mind were being illuminated, the intellectual muscles she hadn't used in a decade, stretching and firing. She wasn't a barista. She wasn't a scorned ex-wife. She was a scholar. Julian listened more than he spoke, posing questions that were sharp and insightful, drawing out her knowledge, her passion. He didn't once ask what she did for a living now, where she lived, or if she was married. He was interested in her mind. Finally, looking at his classic Patek Philippe watch, he sighed. I'm afraid I have a board meeting I am inexcusably late for. He stood up, and Esther did as well, feeling a pang of disappointment that the conversation was over. Thank you, she said, her sincerity catching her by surprise. This has been wonderful. The pleasure was all mine, Esther, he replied. He reached into his suit jacket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It was thick cardstock, with only his name, a phone number, and an email address. No company logo, no title. I have a small collection of my own, he said with colossal understatement. Some pieces have questionable provenance that my curator and I have been debating for years. I would be very interested to hear your opinion on them sometime. No pressure, of course, just a thought. He handed her the card. Their fingers brushed, and a strange, unexpected warmth shot through her. I would love that, she said, her voice filled with a hope she hadn't felt in years. Excellent. I'll look forward to hearing from you, Julian, Devereux said with a final warm smile. He gave a slight nod and walked away, his confident, unhurried steps echoing softly in the gallery. Esther stood frozen for a long moment, staring at the small, cream-colored card in her hand. It felt heavier than a 5-carat diamond. It wasn't a symbol of what she'd lost. It was a key to a door she thought had been locked and bolted forever. Looking back at the Vermeer, she saw the woman in the painting differently. The melancholy was still there, but now Esther also saw a quiet resilience, a hidden strength. A woman with a secret waiting for the right person to come along and understand her worth. Esther stared at Julian Devereux's business card for 2 full days. It sat on her nightstand, a stark, elegant rectangle in the clutter of her modest life. It represented a world so far removed from her own that it felt like a fantasy. Doubts gnawed at her. Was he just being polite? A billionaire taking pity on a sad woman in a museum? The voice of Miles, ingrained in her psyche, whispered that she was out of her league, that she would only make a fool of herself. On the third day, fueled by a mix of desperation and a burgeoning, "What do I have to lose?" attitude, she composed an email. She rewrote it a dozen times, agonizing over every word, trying to strike the perfect balance between professional, intelligent, and not at all desperate. She finally sent it, her heart hammering against her ribs, and immediately regretted it. To her astonishment, a reply came within the hour. It was from Julian himself, not an assistant. It was warm, direct, and invited her to view his collection at his private gallery the following Saturday. The address he provided wasn't for a public museum, but for a discreet limestone townhouse on the Upper East Side. When the taxi pulled up, Esther felt a wave of intimidation. This wasn't just a home, it was a fortress of wealth and taste. She smoothed down her best and only blazer, a purchase from her grad school days, and took a deep breath before ringing the bell. The door was opened, not by a butler, but by Julian himself. He was dressed casually in dark trousers and a cashmere sweater, looking more like a university professor than a captain of industry. "Esther, I'm so glad you came," he said, his smile instantly putting her at ease. "Please come in." The interior was breathtaking, but not in the way she expected. There was no gaudy gold or ostentatious display. It was a masterpiece of understated elegance. Muted colors, rich textures, and everywhere art. A Calder mobile hung in the entryway, its delicate forms dancing in the light from a soaring skylight. A Rothko dominated one wall, its deep, meditative colors drawing you in. But this wasn't the main event. He led her through a set of unassuming double doors into another wing of the house. "My little hobby," he said, gesturing around. Esther's breath caught in her throat. It was a private museum-quality gallery spanning 2 floors. The lighting was perfect, the climate control a gentle hum. And the art. It was a stunning, curated journey through history. A Degas sculpture of a dancer, a small but vibrant Monet, a powerful Francis Bacon triptych. But the heart of the collection, as he had hinted, was the Dutch masters. There, on a velvet-covered wall, hung a Rembrandt portrait she had only ever seen in textbooks. Beside it, a Frans Hals that crackled with life. And in the center, a small, exquisite painting of an interior scene that was so clearly in the style of Vermeer, yet one she had never seen before. "This is the one I wanted you to see," Julian said, his voice soft. "It was sold to my father as a genuine Vermeer in the 1960s. The experts have been divided ever since." For the next 3 hours, Esther forgot who she was, where she was, and the mess her life had become. She was purely in her element. Julian provided her with a magnifying glass and a file containing all the existing research, pigment analysis, X-ray radiography, and the painting's known and disputed provenance. She examined the canvas with a scholar's eye. She talked about the way the artist handled the perspective, the signature use of pointillé highlights on the breadbasket, the chemical composition of the ultramarine blue in the tablecloth. "The provenance is the problem," she finally said, looking up at him. "The paper trail goes cold between 1696 and 1822. But the canvas weave is consistent with Delft linen from the 1660s. And this," she pointed to a faint shape visible only under radiography, "is a pentimento. A figure of a man was painted out. Vermeer did the same thing in Girl Reading a Letter at an Open Window. He removed elements to enhance the sense of quiet solitude." Julian watched her, his expression one of deep admiration. "So what is your verdict, Miss Vincent?" She took a deep breath. "I believe it's authentic. But to prove it, you'd need to match the specific chemical signature of the lead white paint to other authenticated Vermeer works. It's a specific isotope found in lead from the English Peak District, which we know he used. It's a long shot, but possible. He was silent for a moment. That's the most cogent and insightful analysis I've heard in 20 years of owning this piece. You have a gift, Esther. That day marked the beginning of something new. Julian began inviting her regularly, not on dates but as a paid consultant. He insisted on compensating her for her time, paying her a generous hourly rate that was more than she used to make in a day. It was a lifeline both financially and intellectually. She spent her weeks researching, poring over auction catalogues and scholarly articles, preparing reports for him. The work was invigorating, healing. It rebuilt her shattered confidence, brick by brick. Their professional relationship, slowly, organically, blossomed into a friendship. They would end their art sessions with lunch or dinner, talking for hours about everything from politics to travel to their pasts. She learned about his late wife, who had passed away from cancer a decade earlier, and his dedication to funding medical research in her name. He was a man of substance, his immense wealth merely a tool he used to pursue his passions and effect change. He never once made her feel like a charity case. He treated her as an equal, a peer whose intellect he genuinely valued. In his company, she felt her own worth independent of any man or marital status. One evening, about 4 months after their first meeting, he invited her to a fundraising gala for the city's orchestra. "I need a beautiful, intelligent woman on my arm who can tell me if the art they're auctioning off is actually worth bidding on," he'd said, with a twinkle in his eye, making it impossible to refuse. She spent a week's worth of her consulting fees on an elegant, deep blue evening gown. When she met Julian in the lobby of the event, he looked at her, and for the first time she saw something more than just friendship in his eyes. "Esther," he said, his voice a little thick, "you look absolutely breathtaking." The evening was a dizzying whirlwind of champagne, classical music, and New York's high society. People flocked to Julian, and he introduced Esther to everyone, not as his friend or consultant, but simply as Esther Vincent, as if her name alone should be enough. And in his world, it was. It was during the live auction that she saw them. Across the grand ballroom, at a table crowded with what she assumed were other real estate developers, sat Miles and Tiffany. Tiffany was dripping in jewels, her dress a garish shade of gold, looking desperate to be noticed. Miles was holding court, laughing loudly, a man performing the role of a big shot. Esther's blood ran cold. She hadn't seen him since that day in the coffee shop. She instinctively wanted to shrink to hide. But then she felt Julian's hand gently cover hers where it rested on the table. He leaned in, his voice a low murmur in her ear. "Are you all right?" He had seen the direction of her gaze. He had seen her reaction. She nodded, unable to speak. "Old ghosts?" he asked gently. "The architect of my previous life," she whispered back. Julian's gaze flickered over to Miles's table, his expression becoming cool and appraising. He took in the scene, Miles's loud bragging, Tiffany's flashy dress, and seemed to understand everything in an instant. He gave Esther's hand a reassuring squeeze. "Well," he said, his eyes returning to hers, warm and steady. His architecture was clearly flawed. He built a cage. You, Esther, were meant for open sky. Just then, the auctioneer announced the next item, a small preparatory sketch by Edgar Degas. Bidding was sluggish. Julian turned to her. "What do you think?" he murmured. "It's a preparatory sketch for L'Absinthe," she whispered back instantly. "The provenance is impeccable. It was owned by his contemporary, Mary Cassatt. It's undervalued. It should go for at least twice the current bid." Julian raised his paddle. 1 million, he said, his voice calm and clear, cutting through the chatter in the room. A hush fell over the ballroom. The bidding had been stalled at $450,000. Julian's bid was a power move designed to end the contest. Esther could see Miles craning his neck, his eyes wide, trying to see who had made such an audacious bid. His eyes found their table. They locked onto Julian, then flickered to her. The look on his face was a priceless cocktail of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. It was as if his entire brain had short-circuited. He saw her, the woman he had dismissed as a frumpy barista, sitting beside one of the wealthiest and most powerful men in the city, dressed in an elegant gown, whispering in his ear like a trusted confidant. He looked from Esther to Tiffany, who was staring open-mouthed at the scene. For the first time, the 5-carat diamond on her finger looked small. It looked cheap. The gavel came down. Sold. To Mr. Julian Devereux. Julian turned to Esther, ignoring the buzz that had erupted around them. "Thank you for the excellent advice," he said, with a soft smile. "I believe I just got a bargain." In that moment, Esther felt a profound shift. The last vestiges of Miles's power over her crumbled to dust. He was no longer the villain in her story. He was just a man at a table across the room, a footnote in a chapter she had already finished reading. Her world was here now beside this kind, brilliant man who saw her not for what she had been, but for everything she was. The sight of Esther at the gala, seated beside a man like Julian Devereux, did more than just shock Miles Porter. It ignited a toxic obsession. His entire sense of self-worth was built on the narrative that he had upgraded, that he had won. Esther's apparent success didn't just challenge that narrative, it shattered it. The next day, he wasn't celebrating his own status. He was furiously Googling Julian Devereux. The search results were a series of blows to his ego. Devereux Holdings, the multi-billion-dollar fortune, the philanthropy, the world-renowned art collection. This wasn't just some rich old man Esther had latched onto. This was royalty. How he seethed to Tiffany pacing their sterile white-on-white living room. How does she go from frothing milk to that? It doesn't make any sense. She doesn't know anyone. She doesn't do anything. Tiffany, who was more concerned about which photo from the gala to post on Instagram, was growing tired of his fixation. Maybe she got lucky, Miles. Who cares? "We're happy, aren't we?" she asked, holding up her phone to admire a selfie. "Does this filter make my ring look bigger?" But Miles couldn't let it go. It was a personal affront. In his mind, Esther's triumph was his failure. He started digging, calling old mutual friends, trying to piece together the story. The scraps he gathered only fueled his rage. He learned she was working for Devereux as an art consultant. Consultant, he scoffed. "She's a gold digger, that's what she is. She must have planned this, played the victim, trapped him with some sob story. He's an old man. He's probably lonely and senile. She's taking him for everything he's got." This became his new gospel. He couldn't accept that Esther had succeeded on her own merits, so he had to believe she had done it through deceit. And if she was a deceitful gold digger, then it was his duty, his right to expose her, to save Julian Devereux from her clutches, and in doing so, restore his own sense of superiority. His first move was a pathetic, transparent attempt to reconnect. Esther was at her apartment one afternoon when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Hey, Elle, it's Miles. I saw you at the gala. You looked great. Listen, I've been thinking a lot about us lately. I think I made a huge mistake." Esther stared at the message, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. A mistake. His mistake wasn't leaving her. His mistake was thinking she'd still be waiting in the ruins he'd created. She deleted the message without a reply. When his text went unanswered, he grew bolder. He found the email address for Devereux Holdings' general inquiry line. Posing as a concerned friend, he crafted a venomous, anonymous email. "To whom it may concern. I am writing out of grave concern for Mr. Julian Devereux. I have recently learned that he has become involved with a woman named Esther Vincent. While she may present as intelligent and charming, I feel it is my moral duty to warn you that this woman is a master manipulator with a history of opportunism. She is a classic gold digger who preys on wealthy, established men. Her recent divorce left her with nothing, and she is clearly desperate. I urge you to investigate her background thoroughly before she can inflict any serious financial or reputational damage on Mr. Devereaux and his company, a friend of the family. The email was flagged by Julian's long-serving and fiercely loyal chief of staff, a formidable man named Arthur Vincent. The shared surname with Esther was a coincidence that did not go unnoticed. Arthur, a man whose job was to anticipate and neutralize threats, immediately launched a quiet, thorough background check on Esther. He was protective of Julian, especially since his wife's passing, and the email, though anonymous, had the ring of a jilted ex-lover. A few days later, Julian invited Esther for dinner at his townhouse. He seemed quieter than usual. After the plates were cleared, he looked at her, his blue eyes searching her face. Esther. He began, his tone serious. There's something I need to discuss with you. It's a bit delicate. Her heart sank. This was it. He'd found out about her barista job, her tiny apartment, the messy details of her divorce. He was going to let her go. He slid a tablet across the table. On the screen was the anonymous email. She read it, her face paling. The words were a twisted distortion of her life, painting her as a conniving predator. The humiliation she felt was acute, but it was quickly replaced by a cold fury. This was Miles's handiwork. The language, the sneering superiority masquerading as concern, it was unmistakably him. My chief of staff, Arthur, brought this to my attention, Julian said calmly, watching her reaction. He's very protective. He ran a background check on you. Esther flinched as if struck. Oh, he found out about your previous job at the coffee shop. Julian continued. He found out about the details of your divorce settlement, namely that your ex-husband's business was built on seed money you provided from a family inheritance, a fact his lawyers managed to obscure. He also discovered that your ex-husband, Miles Porter, recently closed a big real estate deal with a competitor of mine and has been bragging all over town about his trophy fiancée. Esther looked up stunned. She had never told Julian these details. She had been too proud, too ashamed. Julian reached across the table and placed his hand over hers. His touch was warm and steady. Esther, did you think I was interested in you because of some fabricated pedigree? I am a 70-year-old man who has built an empire. I can spot a sycophant or a fraud from a mile away. They are all I meet. They flatter, they fawn, they agree with everything I say. He paused, his gaze softening. From the first moment we spoke in front of that Vermeer, you have never been anything but yourself. You've challenged me, you've taught me things, and you've never once asked me for anything other than respect for your opinion. You are the most genuine person I have met in decades. Tears welled in Esther's eyes, not of shame, but of overwhelming relief and gratitude. The person who wrote this email, Julian said, his voice hardening as he gestured to the tablet, is a small, bitter man. He is threatened not by who you are with, but by who you are. He tried to diminish you so he could feel big, and he failed. He picked up the tablet and deleted the email with a decisive swipe. Now, that's the end of that. Arthur has been instructed to route any further correspondence from a friend of the family directly to the trash. Let's talk about something more interesting. I was looking at the preliminary sketches for the new wing of the Children's Hospital. The conversation shifted, but the moment hung in the air, a profound turning point. Miles's attempt to poison their relationship had backfired spectacularly. Instead of creating doubt, it had swept away all of Esther's remaining insecurities. It had forced a level of honesty and vulnerability between her and Julian that might have taken months to achieve otherwise. By trying to expose her as a fraud, Miles had only succeeded in revealing the depth of her character and the strength of Julian's trust in her. Meanwhile, Miles's obsession was beginning to corrode his own life. His work suffered. He lost a major client because he was too busy stalking Esther's non-existent social media than preparing for a presentation. His relationship with Tiffany was also fraying. Why are you always talking about her? Tiffany whined one evening after he'd spent 20 minutes ranting about Esther's new life. It's like you're more interested in your ex-wife's life than ours. Don't you love me? Of course I love you, babe, he said distractedly, scrolling through gossip sites for any mention of Devereaux. It's the principle of the thing. She's making a mockery of me. No, Miles Tiffany said, her voice unusually sharp. She held up her left hand, the giant diamond glittering under the halogen lights of their kitchen. This was supposed to be the mockery. We were supposed to be the winners. But all you do is look over your shoulder at her. It's starting to feel like we're the ones who lost. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He had no answer, because deep down, in a place he would never admit, he was starting to feel the very same way. He had traded substance for shine, and now, watching Esther from afar, he was beginning to understand the terrifying difference. The bond between Esther and Julian, solidified by Miles's failed sabotage, deepened into a quiet, profound love. Theirs was a companionship of minds and souls. With Julian, Esther felt she had finally come home to herself. He championed her ambitions, encouraging her to formally re-enroll in her PhD program with Devereaux Holdings, offering to fund her research entirely. She was no longer just a consultant. She was becoming a respected scholar in her own right, preparing to publish a paper on her findings about the disputed Vermeer. One crisp spring evening, almost a year after they first met, Julian took her to a private dinner at the Modern, the restaurant overlooking the Abbey Aldrich Rockefeller Sculpture Garden at MoMA. The garden was closed to the public, empty and serene under the moonlight. After a meal filled with easy laughter and conversation, Julian grew quiet. He reached across the table, taking both of her hands in his. Esther, he began, his voice imbued with a gentle gravity. A year ago, I was a man who was content. My life was full, my work was meaningful, but I lived primarily in the past and the future, in the memory of my wife, and in the legacy I would leave behind. I wasn't truly living in the present. His thumb traced a line over her knuckles. Then I met a woman who was looking at a Vermeer, and she taught me how to see the world again. Not just the art, but everything. The light, the details, the beauty in the quiet moments. You brought the present moment back into my life, and you filled it with a joy I thought was gone forever. Esther's heart swelled, her eyes shimmering with emotion. I know I am much older than you, he continued, and my life is complicated, but I cannot imagine a future without you by my side. Not as my consultant or my friend, but as my partner, my wife. He slid from his chair and knelt on one knee, a gesture of such timeless, humble devotion that it took her breath away. He opened a small velvet box, and inside was not a monstrous, flashy diamond like Tiffany's. It was a ring of breathtaking, unique beauty. The center stone was a magnificent, flawless sapphire, the color of the deepest twilight sky. It was a royal blue cushion cut, around 10 carats, but its value wasn't just in its sunwoods. It was flanked on either side by 2 shield-cut diamonds set in a platinum band that was intricately engraved with a subtle Art Deco pattern. It was a piece of art, a statement of taste and history, not just wealth. This was my grandmother's, Julian said softly. The sapphire is from Kashmir, a region whose mines were depleted over a century ago. They are the most coveted sapphires in the world because of this velvety cornflower blue. It's called the Devereaux sapphire. Like you, Esther, it is beautiful, brilliant, and exceedingly rare. Esther Vincent, will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife? Tears streamed freely down her face as she nodded, unable to speak. Yes, she finally breathed. Yes, Julian. Of course, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It was a perfect fit. It felt not like a possession, but like a promise, a symbol of a love that was built on substance, respect, and a shared view of the world. The news of the engagement of Julian Devereaux, one of the world's most elusive billionaires, to the relatively unknown Esther Vincent, was an explosion in the worlds of finance and society. The story was picked up by the New York Times, Forbes, and even the International Society pages. The articles weren't gossip, They were feature pieces. They detailed Esther's scholarly background, her rediscovery of her passion, and framed the story as a meeting of minds. They mentioned her upcoming publication and her role in advising the Devereux Art Foundation. She was not portrayed as a gold digger, but as a formidable intellectual who had captured the heart of an equally formidable man. For Miles Porter, the news was a public execution of his ego. He was in his office trying to salvage a deal that was going south when his phone started buzzing incessantly. A colleague forwarded him the Times article. He clicked the link and his world tilted on its axis. Billionaire Julian Devereux to wed art historian Esther Vincent. He read the article, his face turning a blotchy red. It praised her. It lauded her keen eye and sharp intellect. It referred to him indirectly as her previous marriage from which she had emerged to reclaim her promising academic career. He was a footnote, a nobody. Then he saw the picture of the ring. It wasn't the size of the stone that struck him, but its undeniable elegance. It made Tiffany's Cartier diamond, which he had been so proud of, look like something from a shopping mall. It was common. It was new money. The Devereux sapphire was legacy history, an entirely different universe of wealth. He stumbled out of his office and drove home in a blind rage. He found Tiffany in their walk-in closet, trying on a new dress. "Did you see it?" he snarled, throwing his phone onto the pristine white ottoman. Tiffany picked it up and read the headline. Her perfectly made-up face fell. She scrolled down to the picture of Esther, looking radiant and sophisticated, the deep blue sapphire magnificent on her hand. An ugly envy twisted Tiffany's features. So she said, trying to sound nonchalant. She snagged an old man. Good for her. An old man? Miles yelled, his voice cracking. He's Julian Devereux. That ring on her finger is probably worth more than this entire building. He's in a different stratosphere, Tiff, and she's with him. Why do you care so much? Tiffany shrieked back, the insecurity finally boiling over. This is what I was talking about. It's always her. I have a 5-carat diamond ring. We have a beautiful home. We're supposed to be getting married. But it's not enough for you, is it? Because she one-upped you. She didn't one-up me. She obliterated me, he roared. Don't you get it? He's everything I'm trying to be. Respected, powerful, old money. And she, the woman I told was holding me back, is now his equal. What does that make me? What does that make you? The last question hung in the air, venomous and cruel. He hadn't meant to say it, but the thought had been there, festering in the back of his mind. If Esther, the woman he deemed unworthy, could attain such heights, what did that say about Tiffany, the woman he had chosen as her replacement? Tiffany's face crumpled. The illusion of their perfect, glittering life shattered in that moment. She wasn't his queen. She was just a prop he had used to make himself feel better. And now that prop was no longer serving its purpose. So that's it then, she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of rage and hurt. I'm just your consolation prize. She wrenched the huge diamond ring from her finger and threw it at him. It bounced off his chest and clattered onto the floor. Keep it, she sobbed. Maybe you can trade it in for a shred of dignity. I'm done. I'm done competing with a ghost. You didn't just lose her, Miles. You just lost me, too. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the closet, out of the apartment, and out of his life. Miles was left standing alone in the cavernous white closet, surrounded by designer clothes and empty shoeboxes. The silence was deafening. He looked down at the 5-carat diamond lying on the plush carpet, the symbol of his victory. It looked pathetic, a tiny, glittering monument to everything he had so spectacularly lost. 6 months after an elegant wedding at their Hamptons estate, Esther's new life was in full bloom. Now, Dr. Esther Vincent Devereux. She was no mere wife to a billionaire, but a celebrated academic and the co-chair of the Devereux Foundation. Her crowning achievement was curating a new exhibition at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Provenance and Perspective, featuring key pieces from Julian's collection. At the opening night, moving through the crowd in a Schiaparelli gown with the Devereux sapphire on her finger, She was the embodiment of grace and intellect. Miles Porter's life, meanwhile, was a mirror image of ruin. His obsession with Esther had cost him everything, everything. His job, his fiancée, and his flashy condo. Broke and desperate, he'd taken a low-level catering job for the gala, hoping to remain an anonymous ghost at the feast. While passing through the European paintings wing with a tray of champagne, he saw her. Esther was standing with the French Minister of Culture, speaking with the easy confidence of an expert. The sight of her luminous, powerful, and so completely out of his reach was a physical blow. This was the woman he had called unambitious. His hand trembled, rattling the glasses on his tray. The disturbance caught Julian's perceptive eye. Recognizing the man who had caused Esther distress, months before he excused himself and approached Miles with quiet authority. "Mr. Porter." I believe Julian said, his voice low but firm. Miles froze, his face burning with shame. I'm working," he stammered, the tray feeling impossibly heavy. "I see, Julian," replied, his gaze taking in the rumpled uniform and desperate eyes. There was no triumph in his expression, only a cool, distant pity. At that moment, Esther finished her conversation and walked over to join her husband. Her steps faltered as she recognized the caterer. A wave of complex emotions washed over her, not anger, but a profound sense of distance, as if looking at a photograph from a former life. Seeing her, a desperate impulse seized Miles. He had to say something to puncture her perfect world. "Esther," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Congratulations. You certainly landed on your feet." The jab, meant to imply her success was dumb luck, came out sounding weak and pathetic. Esther looked at him, truly looked at him, and saw only the ruin he had brought upon himself. The hurt he once caused was gone, replaced by a serene peace. He held no power over her. "Thank you, Miles," she replied, her voice even and gracious, entirely free of malice. "I did. I wish you well." Her calm grace was more annihilating than any rage could have been. It was the ultimate dismissal, a quiet confirmation of his complete irrelevance. Without a backward glance, she looped her arm through her husband's, and they walked away toward the heart of the exhibit she had built, leaving Miles frozen among the priceless masterpieces. He stood alone in the hallowed halls, a ghost surrounded by tangible proof of legacy and true worth. In their silent, imposing presence, he was forced to finally confront the truth: he had traded a masterpiece for a trinket. He hadn't just lost a wife. He had lost an entire world, whose value he had been too blind to ever see, authoring his own lonely, insignificant end. Esther's story isn't just about the dramatic reversal of fortunes. It's a powerful reminder that true value is never determined by someone else's opinion. Miles measured worth in carats and brand names, a shallow currency that ultimately left him bankrupt in every way that matters. Esther, on the other hand, rediscovered her worth by investing in herself, in her passion, her intellect, and her resilience. She didn't seek out a fortune. She became the kind of person a fortune is built around. Her triumph wasn't marrying a billionaire. It was becoming a woman who was his equal, a masterpiece in her own right. It's a stunning example of poetic justice, proving that the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's building a life so full and brilliant that the past simply fades into irrelevance. If Esther's journey from heartbreak to empowerment resonated with you, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this story with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss our next story of incredible real-life drama and ultimate triumph. What did you think of Miles's downfall? Let us know in the comments below.